So the other special right triangle is a 30-60-90 triangle. The 30-60-90 triangle is basically just a way of solving for the sides of a triangle when it's a right triangle and has these degrees, only knowing one side. So if you know one side, you can figure out the rest just by knowing the value of x. Okay? Before we get into that, I want you guys to see how or in what way that these formulas can come about. How can we create these formulas? And the trick is the Pythagorean theorem in this case, okay? So a squared plus b squared is equal to c squared. And the way we're going to construct this is by drawing a equilateral triangle. So that means all these sides are the same. And if it's equilateral, that means all these sides are 60, okay? And what we're going to be doing next is going to draw a line. That's the altitude, and this ends up being the 90-degree angle here. So we split these in half. So next step here is to give value to the sides. So I'm going to go ahead and call this side x, okay, just from here to here, okay. What I'm going to do is I'm going to use the Pythagorean theorem to figure out the formulas for this side here and this side here, and I'm only going to look at this triangle here, okay. So the next step is to give the sides, just basically by knowing the side of this being x, we know that this side is x. So that means this whole side is the whole length, which is 2x, because x plus x is 2x. So that makes this 2x as well. So now we can figure out what this value is here, which is one of the legs. It's the longer leg. And I'm going to call this b, the longer leg. If once we know what the value of the longer leg is, then we have the formula for the 30-60-90 triangle. We already know what we're trying to get to, right? So let's use the Pythagorean theorem to figure this out. So we can call this a, we can call this c. So a squared is really x squared plus b, well, we don't know that yet, so it's b squared is equal to c squared. So it's 2x squared, okay? So in this case right here, we're just going to simplify a little bit further. So x squared plus b squared is equal to 2x squared times 2x squared is 4x squared. Remember, this means double, right? 2x times 2x is 4x squared. Next, we're going to solve for b by subtracting x squared. And then we get b squared is equal to 4x squared minus x squared is 3x squared. You can start seeing where the 3 is coming from, right? Take the square root of this. This becomes a b. And well, we can't take the square root of 3 and get a nice number. It has to be a decimal, so we're going to leave it inside. But the square root of x squared is just x. And that's how we get this equal to x squared to 3. And that's how we get the 30-60-90 triangle formula. So we can now use the formula to solve for any triangle that's a 30-60-90 triangle and only knowing one side. Now before I get into that, I want to basically give names to each side. So we know that this is the hypotenuse. Well, there's two legs. To distinguish between each one, I'm going to call this the shorter leg. This one's going to be called the longer leg. Okay, so in this case here, we're trying to figure out what y is and what x is, right? Well, we know that y is really the hypotenuse and x is the longer leg. This is going to help us figure out which formula we need to use, right? And in a second here, we'll figure out the value of it. So what we know is the shorter leg. Well, the formula for the shorter leg is just x. That we really don't need to do much work here. Now, we just need to plug in. Well, I know the formula for the hypotenuse is 2x, right? Well, if I just double my shorter leg, that's going to be equal to the hypotenuse. Well, that's pretty simple. So double 5 is 10. And then the longer leg, well, the formula for the longer leg is x squared to 3. Well, if I already know my shorter leg, I just need to plug that into x, and that's going to be equal to 5 squared to 3. So the longer leg is 5 squared to 3, the hypotenuse is 10, and we already know that the shorter leg is 5. Okay, so for the next one, basically what we're doing here is the same thing. We're trying to figure out what we know and what we don't know. So we know that x is the hypotenuse because it's opposite. So we know it's a hypotenuse. We know y is the longer leg. And then we already know the shorter leg. This is the shorter leg. And we know that the shorter leg formula is just x, just like it was before. Well, here, all we have to do is just plug into the formulas. We know the formula for the hypotenuse is 2x. So then we just simply plug in. So this is 14, double 14 is 28. And then the formula for the longer leg, well, that one is x squared to 3, right? So x squared of 3, plug in the longer leg, which is, the shorter leg into here. So we get 14 squared of 3. And we just solve for all the sides, just like it was last time. So for this one here is just basically the same thing here. Just try to figure out what you know and what you don't know. So we know that x is really the short leg, right? So we don't know the short leg in this one. Y is the longer leg, so longer leg. But we do know the hypotenuse, and we know that the hypotenuse formula is 2x, so 2x, okay? So here we just divide by 2, we know that x ends up equal to 16. Well, we know that this x is also equal to the shorter leg, right? So the shorter leg ends up being 16. This ends up being equal to 16, okay? The formula for the longer leg, we know that it's x squared of 3. We already know what x is, right? X is 16. So 16 squared of 3 is the length of your longer leg. Okay, so this is problem number 7 from your notes, and the way we work this one out is basically the same way we've been doing it before. So define what each term is. So this side is your longer leg. Y is your shorter leg. And we know the hypotenuse. So if we know the hypotenuse, we know the hypotenuse formula. So 46 is equal to 2x divided by 2, and we get x is equal to 23. So we know that this is really the shorter leg, because that's what the formula says. The hypotenuse is double the shorter leg, so we know that's 23. And the longer leg formula is x squared of 3, and x is the value of the shorter leg, so we just plug in 23 into here, and we get to our longer leg. Pretty simple. All right, so for this one, we know the longer leg in this one. So before we've known the hypotenuse, we've known the shorter leg, but now we know the longer leg. So we know that x is really the hypotenuse. We know y is the shorter leg. So if we know the longer leg formula, we know that x squared of 3 is the longer leg formula, and we set that equal to what it actually is. And we solve for x, we end up knowing what x is. So once we know what x is, remember that's the shorter leg. Shorter leg, once we solve for any of the x's, we know that's the shorter leg. So we're going to divide by square root of 3. Okay, we get these canceled out. X is equal to 20 square root of 3. But just a reminder, we don't like to have the radical on the bottom. So we're going to rationalize it by multiplying by square root of 3 over square root of 3. That way we can take off the square root on the bottom. So 20 times the square root of 3 is just 20 square root of 3. And this one times this one is, remember, it's just square root of 3 squared. Well, these cancel out. So we're left with 20 square root of 3 over 3. And that is equal to your shorter leg. 20 square root of 3 over 3. Well, we also know that the formula, once we know the shorter leg, we double it to get the hypotenuse. Once we know this side, we're going to double it to get this side. So if I double this, it's just like multiplying it times 2. So 2 times 20 square root of 3 over 3. Well, I know this one can get a little bit confusing, but just remember it's over 1. So we multiply the stuff that's outside of the square root. So 20 times 2 times 20 is 40. And then everything else stays the same. So that's the value of your hypotenuse. So it is a little bit more work to find your hypotenuse and shorter leg when you know your longer leg.